All right, guys, we're gonna start talking about builds next. Like I said, I have several different builds and a lot of information to cover, uh, and I will be pausing in between each one of the builds just to make editing a little easier on my part. So bear with me there. Um, the first build I'm going to cover is basically what I would use in dungeons, and what I mostly use in raids as well. Obviously I do switch things around a great bit and more in raids. There is some times where I will switch around in dungeons as well. But anyway, this is what I believe most people use for the most part. I will kind of talk about the spells first and what they do the first time around, and try to go into what what they do and what not. Anyway, sort of lost train of thought there. Uh, all right, so this is basically my dungeon slash raid build, so to speak. Uh, so as you can see, the first ability I have is bolster. It's basically heal over time. It has two ability charges. And it recharges one ability charge every 10 seconds. So it's a point and click targeted type ability. You click on yourself, say for example, and that's what it looks like. You get this little, I guess, crown. It kind of looks like a crown, I guess, on your head, and it heals you over time. It doesn't do a substantial amount of healing, but its primary usage is more or less like psi point generation. But the hot has, the ability for you to throw it on a target that's taking moderate damage, not heavy damage. Uh, the next ability I have is Soothe. It is a freeform sort of aiming spell that you have to use, and it's a charge up setup. So you press the ability and it charges up and goes to different charges. You release it and it heals. But as you can see, you have to aim this thing to hit your targets or allies for it to get the heal. So that's kind of what it looks like. Now what it does is it restores health to yourself and for most injured allies. So it is a smart heal. Good to know. It generates one psi point at charge 2, which was the second bubble you saw. When I was casting, and it gives 2 psi points at charge 3. And of course, the more you charge it, the more healing it does. Obviously, I will go ahead and talk about the tiers while I'm here. I got the tier 4 to basically reduce the charge time, and I also got the tier 8 to add sort of a heal over time. It's not substantial, but it does add a little bit more healing to the spell itself. And it's a good spell because, for the most part, you do spam this spell a lot as a healer. But anyway, the next spell is our finisher. It is the prime finisher. As a healing Esper, you should be using. The other finishers that you do have, I'll talk about them a little bit later after I get through this build, but just aren't as good. So, but whatever he does, okay. I'm gonna close this out for a second. The telegraph is massive. Okay, it's 25-meter telegraph. As you can see, it's quite big. All right, so you can hit a lot of targets with this. It's the bread and butter for the raid healer, so to speak, of role of the Esper. You can use it when you're tank healing as well. It just gets more usage by hitting more targets when you're raid healing. Anyway, Yeah, that's what it kind of looks like. What does it do? Basically, it restores health to yourself and 9 other members. And the amount of health it does restore is totally based off of the side points you have. Um, it also determines how much focus it takes and how much health it heals. Uh, I went ahead and took the tier 4 because it restores an additional 6, 12, 18, 25, and 30% health. Again, based off the amount of side points you have upon using it. To allies below 35% health. I also took the tier 8 because it increases incoming healing by 10% for 5 seconds. All in all, not a bad buff to have. So that covers Reverie. Next ability, support ability, is Pyrokinetic Flame. Now the way this thing works is, I'll show you the telegraph first. Basically, you can see it's got a line telegraph and then a circular portion on the end of it. Basically, you have to aim this at a enemy, right? And what happens is if it hits, it will create that field that you see on the end of it. Let me back up some so you can see it a little better. There you go. And so it creates this field around that target. It does damage to enemies standing in it, and it does healing to allies standing in it. Yeah, and that's basically what it does. So, Conjured Torch lasting 6 seconds that ignites upon attaching to a foe or reaching the end of its path, creating a 10-meter field. It does generate 1 side point. It deals magic damage to nearby foes and restores health to nearby allies for every 1 second. So it's a dot or a heal over time for those standing in it. It's also good to note that this is instant cast now. That's the change that they made from drop 3 to drop 4 when you're above 2 side points. So pretty sweet ability to use. I like using it in dungeons, honest to God, because even if you don't have a heavy melee group that can stand in it, or you have that range that just is chilling on the outside of the field and not getting the buff, it still allows for faster clears. It gives threat to the tanks because I have tier 4'd it, which I hadn't talked about yet. But basically the tier 4, as the tooltip states, allies healed gaining in power, which increases assault and support power by 6% per 4 seconds. Now it's important to note that each tick of the heal for your allies standing in it refreshes the buff. Right? So you can pretty much keep 100% uptime on this ability if you manage it well enough. And in all, like I said, I mean, for dungeons, I like to use it simply because it allows for faster clear speeds. The more assault power I can give my DPS, the faster shit dies. The more support power I can give my tank and myself, the better heals and threat they can generate. So it just makes all in all a pretty easy dungeon run. As well as the damage it does, that's a plus as well. They buffed the damage it does by a little bit from drop 3 to drop 4. So basically, that is that ability in a nutshell. Alright, next ability is Fixation. Basically what it does is it's a self ability. There's no telegraph, so to speak, or anything that you have to aim to targets. But when you activate this ability, it reduces all cooldowns by 60%. Sorry, I was just checking something. The base is 20%, but if the tier 4 in my case is 60%. Anyway, and generates 3 side points, which is a plus. It allows us to get a lot of good burst healing in as it's needed. The tier 4, what it basically does is it generates 10 focus every second for 12 seconds. So free 120 focus. Not that it's always needed in dungeons, let me say that. Especially if you have a lot of focus region anyway. You can always base this, or you can go, the counter opposite of what I'm talking about. You can tier 8 it and try to, keep your interrupts off cooldown, so to speak. Because our interrupts, which I'll talk about in a minute, have very long cooldowns. So, if you interrupt and then pop this, of course, you can reduce the cooldowns as well as get the tiers bonuses, tier 4 and tier 8, from them, and have it up again for another interrupt. So anyway, one note I will tell you is that if you don't feel that you need the tier 4 or the tier 8, feel free to base it, and say if you need 3 interrupts, maybe go towards Crush so you can have 2 interrupts, or 2 interrupts that'll remove 3 interrupt armors. Let me say it that way. So, anyway, next ability is Crush. Crush does magic damage, knocks down 5 foes, prevents any action except dash for 4 seconds, destroys 1 interrupt bar. So that's one of our interrupts I would use. Incapacitate deals magic damage, subdues the target, which basically disarms the target, and it does take away 1 interrupt armor. Okay, so that's what I would basically use for like a dungeon setup. Of course, I want to give you options. So if you don't like Pyro for whatever reason, feel free to take it out and put in Phantasmal armor. It's a single target absorb, and allows, if you have undergeared tanks that you're healing, or there's going to be a lot of burst damage to the tanks, it wouldn't be a bad idea to take Phantasmal armor. It's not too much focus intensive, but it's like a more or less a oh shit button when it's needed. So I have used that a couple times, but for the most part, like I stated earlier, I like Pyro. I really like Pyro, as you'll come to see when I go through all my abilities, or builds rather. Alright, so the last slot I leave totally up to you. Okay, I like Projected Spirit because who doesn't like golden unicorns? Being able to do this. Like, who doesn't like to do that? But anyway, you can feel free to change that out. I mean, I've used, if I need a cleanse for the encounter, I go towards Catharsis. If I need a CC break, I take Fade Out. If I need a root, I'll take Restraint. I never really honestly use Meditate too much or Guise, because like I said, we're not a very focus intensive class. So, maybe, and from what people have kind of hinted at, that you will need maybe using this in Datascape, but for now I don't use it at all. As well as Geist, because Geist is, it does magic damage, cool, awesome, but generates threat, so it's not something that a healer needs. Just put it that way. Anyway, the last ability I hadn't talked about right here is Shockwave. Shockwave basically knocks back foes and interrupts, and allows you to basically have 4 interrupts, or 3 interrupts that, if you run it with Crush and Incapacitate, Crush Tier 4 does 2 interrupt armor. Incapacitate does 1, and then Shockwave would be 4, which is a little overkill. But keep in mind, you do have to be within that 12-meter range for it to destroy that interrupt armor. I have used it on Omna and GA, so it does have its uses. I don't like incapacitating her ads because they tend to have run faster towards Omna if their weapon, so to speak, is you know, fell over close to Omna, then they'll just run over and get closer to her. So I don't like to use Incapacitate for that reason. But when it comes to interrupts, if you want more direct telegraph, Incapacitate's probably the better interrupt, simply because Crush is like a cone and has a little bit of a limited range, as opposed to Incapacitate, which is 30 meters. So anyway, that covers my dungeon build. I'll wait and hold off on amps for another time. But yeah, that basically covers my dungeon slash sort of raid healing build. So next we'll cover a warden build, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next couple minutes here. I'm just going to check dashboard again and make sure I didn't miss any questions.